Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. This show goes year by year, telling the linear history of our country across 250 episodes in preparation for our 250th anniversary, which will be observed on July 4th of 2026. If you're new here, welcome aboard, and if you were returning, welcome back. Now, let's get into the episode. The United States moves closer to a unified national government as the Constitution is ratified by the required 9 states. Debates continue in the remaining states over whether to join the new framework, while the final Congress under the Articles of Confederation prepares to transition power. Welcome to 1788 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and this year begins with both national excitement and criticism of the newly proposed Constitution. In Augusta, Georgia, a special convention is being held, and on the 2nd, representatives unanimously vote to ratify the Constitution, making them the 4th state to do so. Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey all ratified in December of last year. And on January 9th, Connecticut becomes the 5th state to ratify. In other Georgia news, the First African Baptist Church is established on the 20th as more enslaved people are converted. Andrew Bryan is appointed as the preacher, and 67 people initially joined the church congregation in Savannah. On February 1st, the Georgia legislature awards the first and only patent it ever issues for a steamboat to operate on the Savannah River to William Longstreet. He doesn't currently have an operational steamship, but he soon partners with Isaac Briggs, and the two set to work securing funding for this new endeavor, though it proves to be an uphill battle. Near the end of January, the Congress of the Confederation, still meeting in Federal Hall in New York City, elects its final president, Cyrus Griffin, who is tasked with navigating the transition as a new government is soon expected to take control. Debates have been taking place across the states since the new Constitution was proposed. The Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers detail the points being made for and against this new form of government, and Massachusetts has thus far offered strong resistance to the change. Their opposition in part dates back to 1780 when, as we discussed, they ratified their state constitution guaranteeing a number of individual rights, something not included in this proposed federal constitution. Anti-Federalist Massachusetts are seeking to amend the Constitution with a Bill of Rights as a condition to its ratification. John Hancock and Samuel Adams, two men who are anti-Federalist themselves, help negotiate a compromise, agreeing to ratify on the condition of proposing amendments to be considered immediately. On February 6th, Massachusetts becomes the 6th state to ratify the Constitution. 2/3 of the requirement has now been met, with 3 more needed for it to become the law of the land. On the 7th of February, George Washington pens a letter to Lafayette, in which he shares some opinions about the Constitution. We'll read from that letter here. As to my sentiments with respect to the merits of the new Constitution, I will disclose them without reserve. Although, by passing through the post offices, they should become known to all the world. For, in truth, I have nothing to conceal on that subject. It appears to me, then, little short of a miracle that the delegates from so many different states, which states you know are also different from each other in their manners, circumstances, and prejudices, should unite in forming a system of national government, so little liable to well-founded objections. Nor am I yet such an enthusiastic, partial, or undiscriminating admirer of it as not to perceive it as tinctured with some real, though not radical, defects. The limits of a letter would not suffer me to go fully into an examination of them, nor would the discussion be entertaining or profitable. I, therefore, forbear to touch upon it. With regard to the two great points, the pivots on which the whole machine must move, my creed is simply, first, that the general government is not interested with more powers than are indispensably necessary to perform the functions of a good government, and, consequently, that no objection ought to be made against the quantity of power delegated to it. Secondly, that these powers, as the appointment of all rulers will forever arise from and at short, stated intervals recur to the free suffrage of the people, are so distributed among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches into which the general government is arranged, that it can never be in danger of degenerating into a monarchy, an oligarchy, an aristocracy, or any other despotic or oppressive form, so long as there shall remain any virtue in the body of the people. It's now March 21st in New Orleans, Good Friday, and over the home of the Army Treasurer on Charles Street, black smoke begins to billow. Onlookers frantically run to a nearby church and ask that a bell be rung, but as it's a holy day, the priest refuses. With a strong wind blowing in from the southeast, the ensuing conflagration burns nearly all of the wooden structures in the city, including the church. 856 of the 1,100 structures crumble, and the governor orders tents to be set up for the newly homeless. In his report, the governor rather poetically writes, "It is no easy matter to say whether the sight of an entire city in flames was more horrible to behold than the suffering and pitiable condition in which everyone was involved. The tears, the heartbreaking sobs, and the pallid faces of the wretched people mirrored the dire fatality that had overcome a city now in ruins, transformed within the space of 5 hours into an arid and fearful desert. Such was the sad ending of a work of death, the result of 70 years of industry. For now, New Orleans, a valuable port city on the Mississippi, is still a Spanish colony, and their control of access to the Mississippi becomes increasingly contentious in the coming years. President of Congress Cyrus Griffin writes a letter to James Madison on the 24th of March and provides us with a status update on the various states ratifying the Constitution. We are still going forward in the same tract of 7 states. Of course, not a great deal can be done, and indeed not a great deal to do. A prospect of the new Constitution seems to deaden the activity of the human mind as to all other matters, and yet I greatly fear that Constitution may never take place. A melancholy judgment most certainly, and would to heaven that nothing under the sun shall be more erroneous. The adjournment of New Hampshire, the small majority of Massachusetts, a certainty of rejection in Rhode Island, the formidable opposition in the state of New York, the convulsions and committee meetings in Pennsylvania, and above all the antipathy of Virginia to the system operating together, I am apprehensive will prevent the noble fabric from being enacted. The Constitution is beautiful in theory. I wish the experiment to be made. In my opinion, it would be found a government of sufficient energy only. Hopefully you have been enjoying listening to the Federalist Papers, as all 85 are now posted on our YouTube. In a tongue-in-cheek letter from Hamilton to Madison dated April 3rd, we see Hamilton maintaining the public fiction that he and Madison are unaware of the authorship, despite both men being authors of dozens of the Federalist essays. He writes, "I send you the Federalist from the beginning to the conclusion of the commentary on the executive branch. If our suspicions of the author be right, he must be too much engaged to make a rapid progress in what remains." Now, 2 years ago, General Rufus Putnam and Dr. Cutler held a meeting in the Bunch of Grapes Tavern in Boston, focusing on recruiting men and families interested in westward migration. Last year, the Northwest Ordinance opened up territories west of the Ohio River, and Putnam and Cutler's Ohio Company negotiated the sale of 1.5 million acres of land. They wasted no time getting pioneers on board for the migration. Cutler heading out in December last year with Major Winthrop Sargent before the sale was formally accepted. On April 7th of this year, 48 pioneers land in what is to become Ohio's first settlement, Marietta. Now, to set the stage for the next event we'll cover, we will need to look into the state of medicine in America and the social perception of it. The medicine being practiced in 1788 is, it goes without saying, nothing like we know it today. Amputations are common remedies for infections and compound fractures. Antiseptics don't exist, nor is anyone aware what purpose they could serve. Medicine in America is more primitive still than that of European countries. Until 1760, no laws defined or restricted the practice of physicians, so the public relied only on the doctor's word to verify their training. Prior to the founding of the first American medical school in 1967, prospective doctors had to obtain their degrees from European schools. But as many colonial physicians couldn't afford tuition and travel, they instead apprenticed themselves to local physicians as teenagers. With a limited understanding of possible afflictions, American physicians often pursued one-track regimens. Bloodletting is the popular cure-all as a way to drain the body of diseased blood and allow the body to create new, and surgeries, while rarely attempted, have a high risk of fatality. Many choose to skip professional medical treatment altogether and try home remedies or popular elixirs to limited success, delegitimizing the notion that much could be done at all to help an ill person. Those looking to learn the interior body parts could not do so from easily attainable resources, and for nearly all, the body of a deceased person is treated with care and dignity. The idea of cutting up a body is seen as offensive, if not outright sacrilegious. Across the globe, faced with this impasse, anatomists turn to digging up the graves of the recently deceased in order to study internal functions and composition. And in America, the poor, blacks, criminals, prostitutes, Indians, and some immigrant groups routinely have their graves dug up and their bodies stolen in the pursuit of medical training. This has the predictable effect of spurring greater distrust between the people and medical practitioners. It doesn't help that dissection after death was in some cases made a part of a criminal's sentence, not only as a deterrent, but as a legal way to source cadavers for medical studies. This use of dissection as a punishment was even at the time controversial and further stigmatized the practice. By 1788, hatred of medical researchers is widespread in New York City, and against this backdrop, we find a bizarre cause for public violence. As is the case with many of these lesser-known historical events, this story is prone to a bit of folklore, so I've done my best to present only information I could source from primary sources and make sure that we've got the accurate story here. On April 13th, John Hicks Jr., a medical student, jokingly waves out the window of a local hospital to a young boy in the yard below. However, the arm he waves is not his own. It's small and pale, and is in reality a deceased woman's severed arm. Seeing the detached limb scares the boy, who runs to tell his father. Unbeknownst to Hicks, the family has recently buried their matriarch, and the boy believes the arm belongs to her. The boy's father heads to her grave, shovel in hand, and digs up the coffin only to find it empty. It's unknown who took the body, and there's nothing to definitively say that the arm Hicks waved really was hers, but the event is not treated as a coincidence. Hundreds of people quickly gather to march on the hospital, and when they arrive, the doctors and anatomists panic. Most flee as the mob occupies the building, and what they see inside only increases their anger. They drag equipment and specimens into the street to burn, recover several bodies and rebury them, and amass greater numbers throughout the night. On the 14th, several thousand march on a medical building at Columbia College, and Alexander Hamilton stands on the steps begging them not to destroy it. James Duane, the mayor of New York, offers to jail doctors for their own protection, but as the rioters discovered this, some 5,000 gather outside and attempt to force entry into the prison. The mayor sends word to the militia and local political leaders. Upon the militia's arriving, the angry crowd begins grabbing their muskets and breaking them on the ground. John Jay arrives, and a rock is thrown at him, likely cracking his skull. Baron von Steuben, the author of the Army's Blue Book, is hit over the head with a brick, and, bloodied and dazed, reportedly calls for the mayor to allow the militia to fire. The soldiers don't wait for the order, however, and upon seeing how fast things are getting violent, they level their muskets and fire into the crowd. The rioters at first try and hold the ground, and by the time the militia disperses the mob, somewhere from 6 to 20 men lay dead in the street. For days following the incident, troops patrol the city to maintain peace, though eventually the tension lets up. Jay and Steuben, for their part, each require over a week of bed rest but ultimately recover. While we'll never know if the arm that doctor waved that spurred this riot was in fact the boy who saw him's mother, the fact that she was missing from her grave indicates there was either a large coincidence or the practice of grave robbing was so common that some other grave robber had stolen her body. On April 28th, Maryland ratifies the Constitution, becoming the 7th state to do so. In a rare deviation from American history, it's worth mentioning that on May 9th, British Parliament, facing pressure from several abolitionist groups, especially the Quakers, debates and passes a bill reforming slave trade practices. The bill limits the number of slaves that can be placed on a ship relative to its size and requires a surgeon be on every voyage. While clearly a far cry from secession of supporting the slave trade, the bill is notable as it's the first time Parliament is asked to consider the slave trade through anything more than an economic lens. South Carolina ratifies the Constitution on May 23rd, becoming the 8th state to do so. On June 17th, John Adams steps off a ship in Massachusetts after 10 years of serving as an American diplomat in London. He's greeted by Bostonians lined up on a pier as cannons salute upon his arrival and church bells ring throughout the day. His return is not coincidental. It's all but guaranteed by this point that the Constitution will be ratified, and upon the adoption of its various articles, a president and vice president must be elected. Adams hopes to serve his country more directly by being elected in the upcoming election. On June 21st, New Hampshire becomes the 9th state to ratify the Constitution, meeting the requirements of Article 7 and securing the new document as the law of the land. It is subsequently agreed upon that the new form of government will begin on March 4th of next year. Now, already, it is almost a sure thing that the first president will be George Washington. It's difficult to think of anyone more universally known in the day. He has recently come out of his post-war retirement to aid in crafting the now ratified Constitution and commands near universal respect and recognition for his role as Commander-in-Chief in the War for Independence. With the national office of the executive being so new, there isn't a standard of what such a leader should look like, but Washington has led before and is highly esteemed. In the coming months, no official nomination occurs, nobody campaigns for the position, and no speeches are made requesting public support in a run for office. On June 25th, Virginia becomes the 10th state to ratify the Constitution, and on July 2nd, exactly 12 years after the Declaration of Independence was accepted in Congress, The Constitution of the United States is nationally ratified. Congress, out of respect for public will, begins deferring major decisions to the new government, choosing to take no major actions in this period. One action they do take comes on July 25th as they authorize Arthur St. Clair, the governor of the Northwest Territory, to negotiate with tribes at Fort Harmar, though talks stall. Earlier in the year, Congress debated a request from Virginia's District of Kentucky settlers for military support in defending their settlements from the Indians, but took no action as they lack funding. Kentucky, for years now, has been trying to gain statehood and become the 14th United State, but Congress refuses to act on this matter as well, partially due to wanting the incoming government to make such a large change to the makeup of the country, and partially due to a majority of Kentucky leaders being anti-federalist and opposing the new Constitution. New York's stance on the Constitution has been hotly contested. Governor George Clinton is well aware the state possesses the best natural ocean port in the United States, and the Hudson and Mohawk rivers offer easy travel to the interior. As such, he sees no reason to support a national program that will inevitably draw money from his state to help the less well-situated states, but another prominent New Yorker, Alexander Hamilton, is a staunch Federalist. He is one of the main authors of the Federalist Papers, which have been published with regularity in the state, and was pushing for an even stronger federal government than the one laid out in the Constitution. He believes that New York's future lies in becoming the cornerstone of a powerful new America, and also believes that despite the matter being debated, the state will remain the most prosperous member of a diverse collection of free states. Upon the initial meeting of state delegates to weigh ratification, 2/3 opposed. Through both the arguments made in the Federalist essays and the increasing pressure as other states approved ratification, enough of the body eventually converts to the Federalist perspective, and on July 26th, the Poughkeepsie Convention ratifies by a vote of 30 to 27, one of the slimmest margins for approval, and officially makes New York the 11th state to ratify. On September 13th, the Congress of the Confederation, in one of its final actions, resolves that states must appoint electors by January 7th of next year, and that these electors meet to cast their votes for presidency by February 4th. The Constitution grants each state legislature the authority to decide how their elections are chosen. Continuing our eulogizing of signers of the Declaration, we'll take a moment to remember John Penn. John Penn was born on May 17th of 1741 and was an only child. He grew up on a small farm in Virginia where he had hills to climb, caves and dense woods to explore, and plenty of wildlife to hunt. He attended a common school for only 2 years as his father did not consider education important. And at the age of 18, Penn's father died, suddenly and unexpectedly, leaving behind a grieving widow. The family farm needed direction, and his mother needed support and care. The young Penn suddenly realized the need for an education, and his uncle took him under his wing. Under his uncle's tutelage, John Penn practically moved into Pendleton's library, which both Jefferson and Adams described as having no equal in the colonies, and began studying, earning a license to practice law at 21, and serving as a lawyer for the next 12 years. Penn made unfavorable comments about the king in a public meeting in early 74, and someone present reported him to royal authorities. He was duly charged and found guilty by a possibly intimidated jury, and the judge, seemingly sympathetic, ordered he pay a fine of just 1 penny. On principle, John Penn refused to pay this fine and instead moved to North Carolina. Penn was quickly accepted and recognized as a leader in Granville, and his law practice took root. His popularity soared, and in a few months he was elected to the First Continental Congress and to the Provincial Congress. Upon his arrival in Congress, Penn declared, My first wish is for America to be free. John Penn proudly signed the Declaration and was a fearless defender of personal freedoms. When a few members of Congress expressed their desire to pursue criminal charges for a publication criticizing Congress in '79, Penn remarked, "Gentlemen, talk of imprisoning the printer or author is foolish. If you have the power, which I doubt, and were to imprison the editor for 6 months, he would come out a far greater man than when he went in." Now, on September 14th of 1788, John Penn passes away and is buried at his home in North Carolina. The inscription on his grave doesn't recount his achievements or describe his character. Instead, it offers a single quote. "For God's sake, my good sir, encourage our people, animate them to dare even to die for their country." By way of more westward expansion, on September 22nd, Losantville is founded by land speculators Matthias Denman and Colonel Robert Patterson and surveyor John Filson in the Northwest Territory. The settlement is later to become Cincinnati. About 6 weeks after this founding, the first settlers arrive. Throughout this year, as with every year since the contentious treaties were signed with Indian nations, Western settlements face extensive violence from raiders looking to push back on the white settlers encroaching on their claimed territory. Further talks have largely stalled, with the Americans unwilling to yield in their pursuit of acquiring more land, and the Indians unhappy with the proposed terms and untrusting of any promises offered. While no major military action against the Indians is taking place, the West is gaining a reputation for conflict, and tensions build as neither side is looking to make further concessions. Despite this, many farmers in the East are lured westward by promises of cheaper land and better growing conditions. Now, back to New York, Congress is struggling to fill seats. The Articles of Confederation require at least 7 states represented by 2 or more delegates to conduct business, but on November 15th, only 2 delegates are present, rendering the Congress inoperative. Cyrus Griffin unofficially resigns as president, and Congress is de facto dissolved. In New Hampshire and Massachusetts, popular votes for electors occur on December 15th and 18th, respectively, but the state legislature won't finalize this election until next year. And in a footnote that will have massive consequences in the future, on December 23rd, the Maryland General Assembly passes an act authorizing and requiring the secession of a district not exceeding 10 miles square to be selected at a later time to be the future seat of the U.S. government under federal jurisdiction. Well, that is it for this year, but don't go yet. As this episode is a bit short and tomorrow's is a bit long, I will take the opportunity here to provide some information on how things will be run in next year's election. Any state that hasn't ratified the Constitution ahead of the election will not be able to cast votes for the national office. Electoral votes are allocated in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, based on each state's congressional representation, senators plus representatives. Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Virginia have all ratified the Constitution and appoint their electors, making them eligible to vote. North Carolina and Rhode Island have not ratified by the time the election takes place and cast no electoral votes. New York ratified the U.S. Constitution in July, making it eligible to participate, but it will fail to appoint its 8 electors by the deadline due to a legislative deadlock between the state's Assembly and Senate over the method of choosing electors. The Assembly, dominated by anti-federalists, favors a popular vote, while the Senate, with federalist influence, prefers legislative selection. Delaware is set to cast 3 electoral votes, Pennsylvania 10, Massachusetts 10, Maryland 8, New Hampshire 5, and Virginia 12. All these states choose electors by popular vote. New Jersey's 6, Georgia's 5, Connecticut's 7, and South Carolina's 7 are all selected by state legislature. All in all, there are 73 electors. Each may cast 2 votes. The individual with the highest number of votes will become president, and the person with the second highest number will become vice president. How does it go? Well, the tease doesn't really work, as I'm sure you already know, but tune in next time as we cover 1789, when the Constitution goes into effect, the first presidential election and inauguration are held, and a National Bill of Rights is proposed. Get in contact, tell me what you've been enjoying about this show, what we missed. I've truly been enjoying researching and recording this show to share with all of you, and the support that I have been receiving has been awesome. Thank you so much for this. The most important and best thing you can do is share the show with somebody that you know. Get the word out there about our history. We need more people educated in how this country was formed and what our history looked like. Make sure you check out the readings of the Federalist Papers if you're interested. The link is in the show notes here. That is all I've got for today. This has been our story, 250 years of the United States of America. And as always, thanks for listening.